Monday. Yeah, no, I knew
Yeah.
I want to make sure people can hear me back there. Am I heard? How about now? It's about the best you're going to get. Okay. Hope it's not too loud up front. I could put on a reverberation. Okay. Put on glasses that I can see.
Have you spoken to Nicky about what he's doing?
No. No, I mentioned he has stuff that keeps separated and all. So.
No, I just wondered if he's going to do it for beginning.
Right. Yes. Yes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I just want to just very quickly summarize what we did the other day, and then we'll go into tonight's continuation of the Shiur. Gave a general overview of what Shemitah is, why we have it in the first place, and the reasons. We talked about various terms and ideas, such as Kedushat Shvi'it, which was anything that grows on the land of Israel, outdoors, on land that is owned by a Jew, for the most part, has Kedushat Shvi'it. We discussed what that meant. It had a certain level of sanctity, how you have to deal with the food itself, how you have to deal with the way you prepare the foods, how you deal with leftovers, and how you prepare the food as well. I believe I said that as well. We have a lot to cover tonight. Yes. So the question was, does Kedushat Shvi'it apply to anything besides food, such as flowers? So if you take a look on the list, you'll see the word flowers. On the list I passed out the other day. Right after the gardening and potted plants, the next topic is flowers. So the answer is yes and no. And you'll see why I'm saying it like that, because some do and some don't. Okay, so I would like, also I want to mention a couple of things. There's a sheet that should be passing around on a clipboard. The purpose of that is for me to get your personal details and take all your money. So please make sure you fill it out with your bank info. Now, I'm going to be making a WhatsApp group that will only be for me to post things in. I won't take any questions through there. You can always send me questions directly. It will be to post the such things as the charts that will come out as to when things become Kedushat Shvi'it, when there's the time for what's called Bi'ur, which we may or may not get to tonight. Speaking of which, if for some reason I don't cover all the material tonight, I'm going to do a third Shiur. I'm going to just do it like on YouTube or Zoom, and just going to do it whether people are on or not, and then I'm just going to post it. So I might not even post the link for it. We'll see. So one other thing, there are many resources online, and many resources of physical books as well. I know some people like to have a book. I love having books. And one of the best ones, which it's in Hebrew, but I know many of you can still deal with that. It's called Madrich Shmita L'Tzorchan. It's put out by Ota Haaretz, and it's wonderful. It is a really wonderful summary of, and again, I'm going to put this on the WhatsApp group, the different books and websites and charts as much as I can, just to flood you with information. And I highly recommend, if you do have questions, look first to those types of things. And then if you can't find your answer, obviously feel free to be in touch with me or Rav Aviner. So what I want to talk about now is the next two items on the list. For those of you who say, wait, he got new glasses since Monday? No, I really need these glasses to see the paper. So what I said the other day, I didn't see very well. So hopefully I said the right things, I hope. Okay, we're going to talk about gardening prior to Shemitah, which is now, and gardening during Shemitah. That's tonight's first two topics. If you had a fruit tree, and I mentioned this in passing last time, if you have a fruit tree that you still want to plant, you have only until Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, to plant it if it doesn't have a full ball of dirt with the roots all inside. In other words, if you go to a nursery and you see a tree that has all its roots inside and the ball that's sitting on the earth or sitting on a table that's opposite the earth and it's considered already planted, you can do that until I'm going to say the 15th of Elul. According to some opinions, you could do it till Erev Rosh Hashanah. I'm just going to say to the 15th of Elul. If they have exposed roots completely, and that's just roots, you can't plant them anymore. You can't do that anymore. If you have them where they're sticking out partially, you have until the 15th. That you have to do basically to the end of next week. Repeat your question, please. No, I didn't. I meant Elul. If they're completely in a ball of the question was the date, if I was right or wrong, and what I said, if I misspoke, the ball that holds the of earth with all the roots inside, if it's like that, it's a fruit tree. You can do that until the 15th of Elul. Again, some will say to the Erev Rosh Hashanah, but I'm just going to be a little more cautious because there's differences of opinions.
If it's in a pot and you can't see how much dirt is in there.
Again, if it's a pot, if it could last, if it's a pot that has a hole in the bottom and it's been sitting on the earth and it could survive 2 weeks by itself without being watered or anything else, then I don't know how you know that, but yeah, you could do the transfer as well. Okay. So let's continue with this topic of before Shemitah. You can plant vegetables now until late in Elul, until late Elul. And if they come in a flat, they've already been planted. You buy a little flat with already flowering. You can do that until the 29th of Elul, almost till basically Erev Rosh Hashanah. And there's a reason for that, which we're going to see when we talk about another topic, if we get to it tonight. But you can plant now any vegetables you have. You can do that, and the fruit trees again for just a little bit longer. Planting flowers, according to some, if they'll take root before Rosh Hashanah, and according to others, they're more makel, they're more lenient. So the general idea is as follows: unscented flowers you can plant until Rosh Hashanah. If they have a scent, aroma, they can be planted until the 26th of Elul. And also, if they've been in flats, they can be transplanted until Erev Rosh Hashanah. Non-fruit-bearing trees, you just want to plant a nice tree. Until the 15th of Elul, they can be planted. What can you do in your garden before Shemitah? Anything. And it's actually very, very advisable to do this before Shemitah. I'll give you some examples. You should prune your trees. You should fertilize. And if you can buy time release fertilizer, which is highly recommended because you cannot fertilize during the year of Shemitah. Herbicides, risus, where you're killing any pests in the garden, should all be done now or as close to Shemitah. You can do this all the way up until almost the beginning of Rosh until Rosh Hashanah. Now, here's something very important. Please try to remember this. I said the other night that you can't water your garden during Shemitah, but that's not. It is accurate. It just means you can't just take a hose and start spritzing all over the place willy-nilly, whatever you want. Number one, if your garden needs the water, you see it's no matter what you've been doing, it's still dying. You're allowed to water as much as you feel it would need to be alive. Most people have a watering system with a timer on it. What you should do, 2 things before Shemitah. Number one, change the battery inside so it doesn't die in the middle of Shemitah because you can't redo it during Shemitah. Change the battery before Shemitah, and you or your gardener change the timing that instead of, let's say, it waters for an hour and 10 minutes, whatever it might be, drop it down a little. Drop it down to an hour. If you do an hour, drop it down to 55 minutes, just a little bit less than you normally would use time-wise. If your garden has a problem because of it's an unusually hot time or whatever it might be, and you see that there's problems, you're allowed to add water. You could change that. But you should make sure before Shemitah to try to set that up in advance. The general rule, and we're going to see this a few times, is things that are meant to do to maintain the tree and the fruit can be done. Things that are meant to promote growth cannot be done. Because since you can't fertilize during Shemitah, that's why you need to put in the slow release fertilizer early and the pruning. Now, there are times you're allowed to prune. I'm sorry, Barbara, did you have a question? I have these glasses. I'm not sure it's you, I think. Okay, good.
I think that I was just trying to figure out what you said, why it jogged my memory, but I think that the reason the watering or the watering can with by hand is that if you have long-acting time release fertilizer, that activates it.
Correct. So what Barbara just mentioned, which is a very important point, if you have time release fertilizer pre-done already before Shemitah and you start to hand water it also, you're actually causing that to work faster and promote that, and therefore you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing. Okay, very good. Pruning, yes.
So the maintaining is also for non-food stuff?
Yes.
You shouldn't
Yes. We're
water
going to
it.
talk about flowers separately, but
You
yes.
shouldn't really just stop water.
Sorry.
Better to have the whole thing set up that goes, only if you really see the real problem.
Yes. Sorry. Okay. Pruning should be done before Shemitah. Everyone's garden eventually looks a little ratty during Shemitah. That's just the way it is. There are times, though, you're allowed to cut branches during Shemitah. I'm going to mention that now, since I'm mentioning what you can't do. If you have a branch that is preventing you from walking on your walk, it's has fruit that's falling off and it's causing all kinds of damage to your neighbor or to your own property. And even, by the way, when it's not Shemitah year, you're allowed to cut that off as well. Something that's to promote, because usually when you prune a tree, it's to promote growth, because the less water that has to be divided among branches, the more water that goes to the branches that exist. So generally you don't prune since you're not pruning that to promote the growth of the tree, but rather to protect yourselves or your property, then in that case it would be okay. What about gardening during Shemitah? And I'm going to come to flower pots and indoors and outdoors in a couple of minutes. Pruning, weeding, any kind of cutting away of the tree for removal of disease, clearing a path, only for those purposes. Again, if you're going to prune, you're going to weed, you're going to cut away something, part of a tree, whatever it might be, can only be done if it is for the purpose of clearing a path, protecting the tree so it shouldn't die. Weeding can actually be done for aesthetics, meaning let's say you have if you have volcanic rock and you have weeds growing in there, you can actually remove those because it's not, and you shouldn't rip them out by the roots, you should cut them. Okay, I'm gonna say that again. Don't rip them out by the roots, cut them if they're growing. That's for aesthetics, not if you have a tree that's got weeds growing at it. They just have to grow. Okay, unless they start to damage the tree and it's recognizable, and sometimes you may not know that, you need your gardener to tell you, then you have a different option. You'll talk to the gardener at that point. You were thinking about, okay, the question was, what about bugs? If you have an infestation, then you could do what you can to protect your tree. That is correct. But you can only do, and again, that's why you would need a professional, only the amount you really need. If you have an infestation of ants or whatever it may, beetles or whatever it may be that may damage the tree, it has to be that's going to damage the tree. If it's just gross, you just have a lot of ants, it's hard, if they're on the tree itself, to start putting something there that's going to be a resus type. If you have mites, if you have other things on a tree, then yes, you're going to have to, again, talk to your gardener. What would be the minimum you would need to protect the tree? That's really the basic guideline. Is it to protect the trees, to protect the tree from getting worse, which is why if a tree is bent, you could stake it. It starts to bend in the wind or whatever it might be, you could stake it because you're protecting the tree and also you're saving your space of being able to walk around.
What if it's not, if you're not using a watering system?
If you're not using a watering system, talk to me afterwards. Okay, I'll put that on WhatsApp because it's going to be, it's a little bit more complicated when you're not using a watering system. Yes.
So I have a pomegranate and I put
the netting. That's what I'm coming to. Whatever. I'm coming to that in a moment. You cannot do any action that prepares the earth for planting, even if you're not going to plant. Classic example. Let's assume for a moment Rivkarina decides that in this area, let's say there was all kinds of stone, little stone garden, or just had stones. You cannot start removing all the stones from the earth, even if you don't plan to plant anything there, because preparing the earth for planting, in order to do that, one of the first steps you would have to do is to remove any of the debris, any of the rocks. There are circumstances where if you're going to remove them because you're going to do something on the ground, potentially, each case is, again, that's one of those situations where you have to ask a question to really know, can I move those rocks or not? I'm not talking about one rock. To start collecting rocks from an area that's physically on the earth, on the grass, you can't do that during Shemitah. Anything that looks like you are preparing it for planting And obviously, maybe it's not so obvious, you cannot do anything that you do want to plant to prepare the earth. So you can't take a hoe and start making lines in the grass, in the dirt, even though you're planning on planting after Shemitah. You can plant anything you want after Shemitah, but you can't do any preparing of the earth or the soil during Shemitah itself. Harvesting. This I mentioned on Monday, and now I'm going to repeat it because it's within the context of the garden. Assume you have a lemon tree, and you want to take lemons. You could take in enough lemons for a couple of days. Now, if you're planning on cooking a lot with lemon, so you take a few lemons. You cannot take a basket and fill them with lemons, even if you're going to be giving away to your neighbors. Many of us who have a Baruch Hashem an abundance of fruit, sometimes we just give them away, which is fine. But you can't take 25 lemons and then go distribute them to your neighbors. Why? Because one of the things we saw was that you're not allowed to do any action that shows like you're going to do some form of business, even though you're not selling them. But that's what someone would do, to gather a lot and then put them in a basket and bring it somewhere. So you can't do that. In addition to that, someone who wants to come into your yard, remember, all the fruits that are growing in your garden, because there's no concept of heter mechira on your private garden. So all those fruits that are growing, or vegetables, have kedushat shvi'it. Again, they have that sanctity of shvi'it, of the 7th year. Vegetables, again, the day they're picked, once they're picked in the Shemitah year, that's when it kicks in. Fruit is when the fruit has grown on the tree during the year. So all the fruit at the beginning of this coming year is still the 6th year produce. Middle of next year, middle of Shemitah, and in some cases very late next year, those fruits will then take on kedushat shvi'it in the next crop. Now, those fruits that are kedushat shvi'it are hefker. They're ownerless. Things that are ownerless do not take trumot masot. So once you take those, you can come, and they're hefker, which means you don't need someone's permission. As a matter of fact, you should not ask someone for permission to come to take fruit off their tree. Because once they say, sure, take it off the tree, it implies they had the right to tell you to take it or not take it. And you're not allowed to show ownership of any sort on kedushat shvi'it fruit. It is a custom many have. If your trees, and again, I know I mentioned a couple of these things the other night, that if your tree is accessible easily, people are walking by, and there's rimonim growing or whatever it might be, so you put a sign outside that says hefker. Oh wait, it's already hefker, right? He said that. So very briefly, I told you I'm not going to get into these disputes in halacha, but this one I want to mention. There's a very big question in halacha. Do we, as the human beings who have the mitzvah, have to say the fruit and the vegetables are hefker? Or is it that Hashem has made them hefker for us? It's a machloket. So therefore, we err on the side of caution. The question is, if it has to be done by us, and someone forgot to say, my fruit is hefker in front of 3 people, technically, if I come into your yard and I take it, I've stolen, because it's still yours. It's Shemitah. So it causes a lot of problems. So the best thing to do is, if you have a tree that's easily accessible from outside, and even if it's not, put a sign that says hefker. And it's also good if you can, it's advisable, say in front of 3 people, your 3 neighbors, say, come on outside for a second. All my trees, all my fruit, all my vegetables, they're hefker. But you should do that in the Shemitah year. Don't do that now. And again, don't do it on your fruit trees that are growing now, because if they make those hefker, then, I mean, they're yours. There's no kedusha to that whatsoever. You can put it, it's an interesting question. The question was, can you just put it on a WhatsApp group and say, all my fruit is hefker? So I would imagine the answer to that is yes, but I'd have to think about that. Does that be done in front of people? Because we're going to come to the topic of biur. If we get to it, that actually has to be done in front of 3 people for sure. Yes.
Make that declaration of Shabbat, for example.
You can't.
Shabbat is when we have people in our
Right. No, you can't do that. You can't make something. You can't be mafkir on Shabbat. Yeah, it's better to do that. Yeah, have a party. Well, come over and say it's hefker. Let's talk about potted plants. Yes, you can. But good. So the question is, what about, as was said, moseying onto someone's property? Okay. Again, you touched on a halachic issue, and that's as follows. You are not allowed to have what's called shamur. You can't have something that's protected that you can't allow someone to get to. But means they have to have access to your fruit. But does that mean that they don't have to ask your permission? Let's say the only way to get to it is to come to your house. So they could just walk into your house. Is that right? Walk in your backyard, take the fruit and walk out. No. But if it's accessible from the outside, are you allowed to put a fence there to prevent people from coming in? What if there are people in the neighborhood who are unscrupulous who will come in and take other stuff? So it depends on the circumstances. Generally speaking, if let's say, for example, again, I'll use Rivkarina's home as an example. Let's say you have fruit trees back here. Okay, what do you have? Pomegranates. Okay, I want pomegranates. And we have a pomegranate tree that Baruch Hashem has done okay for the last couple of years, but I want pomegranates. I want little baby pomegranates. And I see she's got some nice ones growing on the tree. So I come by. Now I have to buzz in. So I buzz her. I can't climb, not gonna climb the fence. Not that dog. I've been biting. I get buzzed in. Hi, it's me. She buzzes me in. I go right to the backyard and I take it. She can't stop me. Because because if she stops me from coming to the backyard to take her fruit, then it's showing ownership over the fruit. And again, it's a very fine line. Like, we don't want to just leave everything wide open because who knows could walk into your place. You don't have to allow someone you don't. I mean, it'd be ridiculous to say just anyone can walk into your house and go to your backyard. So you have to be judicious in making sure that you should make it as easy as possible for someone to be able to come into your garden to get to your fruit. Thank you for the question. Potted plants. Yes.
Once you do that once with somebody, are you good for the year in terms of?
No. The question was, if you do that once for somebody, you're good for the year. No. The answer is no. It's each case. Because once you start preventing someone from coming in, it's shamur. It's being watched by you, and you're not allowed to do that.
But you don't. The kavanah, if at the beginning of the year I wanted to invite people over just to the yote idea that my trees are hefker.
Right.
My question is, am I good for that year?
For hefker, okay. The question is if he makes things hefker in the beginning of the Shemitah year, or when the trees start having fruit on it, is that good for the year? Yes. You only have to do hefker one time, with the exception of biur. I know I keep mentioning biur. We're probably not even going to get to it tonight, but that's much later in the Shemitah cycle, so I'll talk about it a different time. Potted plants, if they're inside, want to grow tomatoes in your house, inside, under roof, not on the floor of a first floor apartment or home. Like for the example, if you were to put a potted plant here on the floor and want to plant tomatoes, you can't do that. A first floor that is on the ground level in Israel is considered being on the earth. So you can't plant. However, if you have let me just read what I have here. If it's under the roof and it's resting on a plate, not on the ground floor, it can be cared for in the usual manner. So if you're in an apartment that's not on the floor, the level of the ground, you can put little plants, you can plant little seeds, you can eat the food. It does not have kedushat shvi'it. It's nothing. It's just no different than 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, or 5 years ago, because it has no connection to the outdoors, to the earth that's outside. If you have a window box, if you have a mirpeset that has things growing on it, vegetables or other items, now I need to explain two terms. An atzitz is a flower pot. Atzitz nakuv means it has a hole in the bottom. And atzitz she'eno nakuv doesn't have a hole in the bottom. And it's very simple. Atzitz nakuv means that the hole in the bottom makes a connection between it and whatever's below it. An atzitz, or a flower pot without a hole in the bottom, is a standalone. So in the house, again, not on the first floor, it's fine. It's not a problem. If you have a flower pot that's outdoors, let's say it would be over here, or you have it on the mirpeset, you have it somewhere partially hanging outside your window, as long as it's partially under the sky and getting the sunlight and the rain and whatever else it might be, whether it is an atzitz nakuv or she'eno nakuv, is no different than how you treat your garden right in the backyard. Which means
what if it's on like a table?
On a table where? Meaning on the first floor apartment?
No,
Inside.
outside.
Outside doesn't make a difference. Once it's outside, it's already considered part of the. Now, let me clarify that. I'm gonna read to you what I have here also, and that'll help you.
You just repeat, you're talking about the
Yes.
tzitzim are outside as opposed to in your house.
Right. The atzitzim that are outside have kedushat shvi'it.
And is there a difference between
Nakuv and eno
flowers and
nakuv.
vegetables?
Yes, we're gonna come to flowers its own. Yes, we're gonna come to that shortly. Yeah, hold on with flowers. Sorry?
You have the first floor.
if you're not on the first floor and the items are inside your house, do what you want.
Outside on your test, which is not the first floor.
Doesn't make a difference. Once it's outside in the earth of Eretz Yisrael. It's outside. It's getting the air, it's getting the sunlight, it's getting the rain. Fruit trees and vegetables. Okay, again, we're going to come to that. That'll be the similar idea as far as flowers. Yes. If you're in -2, right? You're not on the ground floor. Okay. The question is, if you're in the certain buildings where you're not on, like we live on -4, so we're on the ground floor. So if we were to put something on our ground, it's going to be a problem. Quotes. I said problem. Don't use the word. But if you're above that level, then you're okay indoors. You can do what you want.
When you go down one level, they have, it's like garden level. That's not considered first floor, ground floor.
Which? Okay. The
Like
question is
where,
about.
Judy, the Lewins live.
Okay, so that is not considered, right? So the question is, if outdoors, again, when you're outdoors and you're not on the first floor, doesn't make a difference. You're outdoors. Okay, if you have an outdoor garden, you have an outdoor garden. It's the same thing as being here or being there. Doesn't make a difference. The difference between indoors and outdoors. You can plant in a natzitz she'eno nakuv inside. I already told you that. Again, a flower pot, it doesn't have a hole in it on the bottom. Can be planted on the inside as long again as it's not on the ground floor. The reason I'm repeating this is that last Shemitta cycle, I got a ton of questions on this, and I'm going to get more because this is one of the more not complicated, it's confusing because there's so many factors: indoors, outdoors, with an atzitz nakuv, atzitz eno nakuv. Is it on the first floor? Is it on the? So just let me give you the facts, and then individual questions you can always message me, please. When you do put it on the ground indoors, it should rest on a non-earthenware bottom. Use plastic, for example. That's fine. You may, it is permitted to move a plant in the house from one spot to another so it can get more sun. You can do that as long as it's in the house. A flower pot that has a hole and it's outdoors cannot be moved from one spot to another. I'll say that again. Assuming I left the pot Erev Rosh Hashanah over here and I was growing something and it has a hole in it. It's outdoors as it's on the earth. I cannot move it from point A to point B. 1 second, sorry. I'm sorry, I was going to finish the thought. That's if it's nakuv. If it is a no nakuv, it does not have a hole and it's outdoors. It can be moved as long, and this is the little strange one, all the foliage needs to be like over the plate in which you're carrying it. So if you have a small little plant, right, and it has all these leaves, if it's like this, where it's all hanging over, it's almost impossible to move it by keeping all those foliage over that plate. So again, if you're going to move an atzitz, you're going to move a flower pot that has no hole in the bottom from one point to another point in your garden, it should be at a point where it's still very small. Some recommend even putting plastic or something over to keep it all enclosed. Okay, I'm sorry. Now, as to your question. It's okay. I was hoping that would happen.
If you have a flower pot that is not cool, but it's on a plastic plate outside,
That's considered a no nakuv.
it's considered a non-cool.
Because it's sealed. Tachlis. You also are allowed, and I say permitted, and you can, and you may. I say it multiple times. Did you say can or can't? It is mutar, it is okay, it is permitted to move an atzitz she'eino nakuv to your house from your garden. Okay? Again, you should try to keep it as best as possible over the plate when you're moving it. You may turn an atzitz nakuv into an eino nakuv during Shemitta, but not vice versa, which means if you have an item that has a hole in the bottom and you want to seal it or put a plate underneath that's not earthenware, it's plastic, for example, and then have that take on those rules, whatever they may apply, that's okay. But you can't take an atzitz that's out here, for example, or even more so on the first floor and the inside, and punch a hole in the bottom during Shemitta because you are changing its status to basically a higher level. It's almost like you transplanted it. Again, I want to caution you about something. If you go online, and I'll send out links as we get closer to Shemitta, it's pointless to do it this far in advance for something that really applies during Shemitah, but sometime in the beginning of Elul. And you take a look at this topic of flower pots. That's going to be the one. That's Bishul on Shabbat. What do I mean by that? It's so very confusing sometimes. But this is obviously a microcosm of it. It's a much smaller issue. But it's like you have the chart with like what were they called? The AAAB in genetics. What's it called? That was the no. Genetics. You have AAAB, not Mendelian, Mendelian chart. Yeah. So Mendel, right? A, capital A, small a, the recessive genes. Okay. So that's kind of what this is like. Okay. For those of you who learned Gemara and learned about the four Shomrim, Shomer Sechinam, Shomer Sachar, and it brings back very frightening memories to me from 6th grade. All the charts of when the Shomer is he's not being paid and something is stolen or he swears. It's this. That's the subject, which is why I'm going to mention these facts and I'm moving on. So we have specific questions. I'll address each one, but in WhatsApp messages. Flowers. Let's talk about flowers. Flowers that are used as a seasoning. So you grow flowers. Ever cook with lavender? Well, that's not flower. What's that? In seasoning, you can actually flowers that are used in cooking, right? Not as a seasoning. Okay, flowers. I'm not talking about herbs yet. Flowers have kedushat shvi'it. Flowers that have no scent do not have kedushat shvi'it. The question is flowers with an aroma or with a scent. This is a source of a huge machloket in poskim. I'm going to mention the names because it's important to know. We're not talking about, like I say this and Joe says this. Rav Yashiv and Rav Vosner said that flowers that have a scent have kedushat shvi'it. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal, and Zatzal goes to all of them, says that if they are grown for a fragrance, specifically you're growing because you want to have a fragrant garden or whatever it is, they have kedushat shvi'it. Otherwise, they don't have kedushat shvi'it. So what do? So it's best actually to buy flowers in a place that are to udot, that have it's kedushat shvi'it or not kedushat shvi'it, so you'll know. Buying flowers from people selling them on the streets, unless they are religious and they know what they're talking about, it could raise some questions. I know that in the yeshivot and seminaries, they tell all their students, don't give flowers for Shabbat when you go to your hosts. I mean, nowadays, I don't know who's going to anybody right now, but that's a different story. But it's actually better to stay away, if possible, from any Shabbat flowers on your table. If you're specifically buying scented flowers, you're going to be putting on your table. Now, if you do, and you know that they were growing, they have kedushat shvi'it, that's fine. Just understand that when their Shabbat is over and they're still in good shape, you can't just toss them. It's like food. They have kedushat shvi'it. You have to get rid of them in the proper way. Once they start to to disintegrate, to wilt, then you're allowed to then just wrap them and get rid of them. Right. However, you're right. So that's also like food. Food, you have the two choices. You can wrap it immediately and put it in the garbage. You could let it sit open in the pach Shemitta or put a piece of something on top of it before you put something else on top of it. But I used to mention in passing that once something gets tossed into the garbage, right, it's still better if you can to wrap something in the garbage. The first, for sure, if you just throw it right in the garbage. But even things that went into the pach, it is not required, for sure not, but it'd be appropriate. It's just this reminder of making sure we are careful with kedushat shvi'it food. There's something I did not mention, or I mentioned very quickly the other night in that same vein, which is things that are grown on heter mechira. And again, if you weren't here for the first shiur, you'll see it on the video. Things that were grown in the land that is heter mechira, which does not have kedushat shvi'it, it is highly advisable for Rav Kook, Zatzal, to treat it as if it is kedushat shvi'it. If you happen to make a mistake, no harm, no foul, as they say. But he says this is one way we can keep our connection to the land, and we kind of act as if, and therefore covers everything that we're working with. I want to mention a couple of things now that have kedushat shvi'it by certain categories. And some of this is a repeat from Monday night. Any otzar beit din, produce, vegetables, or fruit, has kedushat shvi'it. Anything picked in your private garden has kedushat shvi'it. And again, with all that goes with it, it's hefker, no trumot and masrot, how you prepare the food, how you get rid of the leftovers, and all those other wonderful things that go with it. If it is grown by a non-Jewish land, again, heter mechira land, I shouldn't say non-Jewish. It's really the wrong way to say it. Heter mechira land, it does not have kedushat shvi'it. However, in Bnei Brak, and if you have relatives living in Bnei Brak, or you're there for Shabbat, the Chazon Ish was very, very strong on this. He said that even heter mechira produce has kedushat shvi'it. So in Bnei Brak specifically, I'm not sure of any other city, but I know for sure in Bnei Brak specifically, heter mechira produce, if you find it on someone's table, they have to treat it as kedushat shvi'it in deference to the Chazon Ish.
Yeah.
Yes.
Last time, I think it was from Osar they did, but there was produce that was grown somewhere way south in Israel. That is
Arava.
not within the,
Right. Okay.
the biblical border.
Right. So I'm going to repeat the question, and I'm going to touch on that briefly. We look at the land of Israel, and we see it from basically Betula all the way down to Eilat, and from east to west. It's our beautiful country that we have. There are certain sections of the land of Israel that, while they are considered biblical Israel, there's still the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, there's still everything of ours. Something's grown in those certain areas, and I'm being very unclear at the moment on purpose, do not have any Kedusha of Kedushat Shvi'it when food grows there. Certain areas of the Arava, certain areas way up north, certain areas way down south. And the reason I'm being very wishy-washy is because those borders are not clear. So there are items you're going to buy that'll say from the land of Olei Bavel or Olei Mitzrayim. Because there are two different times the land received its level of Kedusha, when the Jews returned or came for the first time after crossing in the time of Yehoshua, and then when they came back from Bavel. And it also impacted the borders for where the land has a Kedusha that's relative to Shemitah, not to get the Kedusha of the land. Kedusha is every square millimeter. So just you'll see those terms on packages. So Judy, thank you very much for mentioning that. Just again, you have nothing to lose when you treat something as it is Kedushat Shvi'it, with the exception of Trumot Masot, when you're not sure. When you're not sure. Let's talk about in a regular time period when it's not the Shemitah year, and you buy fruit on the side of the road from someone. They take Trumot Masot or not, right? So if you don't know, that now falls in the category of what's called Demai. It's an unknown status. Daled Mem Aleph Yud, Demai. And therefore, in that kind of situation, you have to take Trumot Masot, but without a bracha. Because it's a Safek bracha. Safek brachot, when there's a doubt of whether or not you have to make a bracha, with only two exceptions, I'll leave that to your homework, you don't make the bracha. Vegetables that are grown on a matzah menutak. That's in a hot house, a greenhouse, on a raised platform, or hydroponics. When it's on a raised platform where it's not, sometimes, for example, let's say I have a wooden bench, and I put a potted plant on top of that, and it's got a hole in the bottom, and it's right above the ground, doesn't make a difference. That's considered in the ground. We're talking it's detached. There's no connection whatsoever between the ground. It's inside, first of all. It's in the hot house or whatever, the hamamah, and it is not attached to the ground at all. Those vegetables or fruits have the same status as anything growing right now. They have no Kedushat Shvi'it whatsoever. Medicinal plants, if you have an aloe vera plant, for example, in your backyard, that does not have Kedushat Shvi'it. You can use it as you want. Spices, they may have Kedushat Shvi'it. Now, for those of you who are here, I'm saying it like that for a minute, you'll understand why. I passed out a sheet that has 2 pages or 3 pages at the end with lists in Hebrew of spices. One column says whether or not it has Kedushat Shvi'it. For those who will be listening to this on YouTube, Ezrat Hashem, it will be in the comments section. There'll be a link to a Google Doc that has all these sheets. So fear not. It tells you a few things. Number one, if it has Kedushat Shvi'it and when it kicks in, it'll tell you when there's a concept what's called Bi'ur and Svichim. Those are 2 topics that, if we get to them, great. If not, you'll hear it on the 3rd Shiur on YouTube. But the main one for tonight's purpose is that the sheet has Kedushat Shvi'it or not Kedushat Shvi'it for these various spices. What was the determining factor in those? I honestly don't remember. But I also tell you, going back to regular Trumot in Ma'asrot, you should know that certain spices you have to take Trumot Masrot without a bracha, and some you don't have to take Trumot Masrot at all. Depends on certain factors, what it's grown for, what it's used in. So again, become a more educated consumer when it comes to these items. Don't just say, oh, it's just an herb, just some basil. Okay, you really need to know whether or not you need to take Trumot Masrot, again, in a regular time period. A non-fruit bearing tree has no Kedushat Shvit whatsoever. Meaning if you wanted to cut a branch off of a tree and burn it in a Black Ba'omer bonfire, you're welcome to do that. So there's no Kedushat Shvit in a non-bearing, fruit-bearing tree. I'm going to talk about a topic now that is confusing. I'll try and make it clear. Don't go, what? Hang in there. I teach, over the years, I've taught Chatan classes many times. How's he going to connect Chatan class to Shemitah? And I start explaining certain halachot of between husband and wives of the halachot. And I say, okay, I'm going to say something. You're going to say, what? Just wait for me to explain it. And they always go, I say it, and they go, what? Mm-hmm. So hang in there. If you go to a store and they have Kedushat Shvit cucumbers, and you give let's say it's our makolet here, you give Mickey 10 shekel for the cucumbers, and you take the Kedushat Shvit cucumbers, if it is not Otzar Beit Din, that money, the coins that you gave him, have Kedushat Shvit also now. The Kedusha remains on the cucumbers, and in addition to that, jumped, so to speak, onto the coins. Your question is, what? Right? Like, wait a minute, now I go to my clothes, means something that changed there in the drawer is going to be Kedushat Shvit money, and I go to Rami later, how am I supposed to know? So hang on one more second. The first thing to understand is that Kedushat Shvit can transfer to money. Coins. It cannot transfer to checks. It cannot transfer to credit card. So if you buy paper money cannot transfer to the best of my recollection. I'm going to verify that. Okay, but I know coins for sure. I have a few friends that I know that will only buy fruits and vegetables during the year of Shemitah and beyond, only on a credit card, because there's no issues then. However, when you go into a store, you do not need, this is Rav Avinar just spoke about this last Shabbat, so it's still fresh in my mind as well, besides it being in Rav Rimon's Sefer as well. You do not need to be concerned that potentially some of that money is in the till that has Kedushat Shvit to it. Why? Again, that's going to take a while to explain. I'm not going to get into it. But where does it really hit you? So generally it won't. But let's just say, for example, we know that you're not allowed to deal business with Kedushat Shvit. So how do they sell foods? Again, that is a different discussion that's beyond tonight's scope. But let's say, for example, your neighbor, wants to take something for you. It's hefker, right? That's fine. And then they decide now it's theirs. Now there's somebody else who it's owned, or it's not hefker anymore. And down the street, someone needs 6 lemons, and they're too lazy to go to someone else's tree. They say, okay, look here, I'll tell you what, give me 2 shekel. Here are your lemons. Why would they do that? Let's just say they did. Those 2 coins, those 2 shekel, or 1 coin of 2 shekel, have Kedushat Shvit, and the only thing you can use that money for is to buy Kedushat Shvit produce. It's not like it's holy that you can't do anything with it. You don't put it in tzedakah, for sure you don't. If you know for a fact it has Kedushat Shvit, treat it as such. You can only use it to buy Kedushat Shvit foods. Going back for a moment, let me just see if I finished on that topic. Okay, going to continue on the topic indirectly. I was mentioned on the last shiur about something about these coupons and Otzar Beit Din. I'm only going to mention it in 1 or 2 sentences. This is what you're going to need to do your own research for. I'll tell you the general idea. Remember, Otzar Beit Din worked as follows: that the Beit Din or Batei Din send their messengers, in quotes, out to the fields, which means they engage the workers who work in the fields normally, because you're not seeing these guys running out working in the fields, and that's not their job. And the produce is collected, is then stored by the Beit Din, and X amount is put into the market every day. If you go to the shuk, for example, you'll find in the beginning of the day, there's going to be X amount of Otzar Beit Din tomatoes, let's say. And by a certain point of the day, they're going to be gone. And when they're gone until the next day, and more Otzar Beitin is brought out. There are organizations that you can go online, do your own research, and you can find where you can buy coupons that is already prepaid. And so the money that is received for the purchase of those is not paid for. You're not paying for the fruits or the vegetables. You're paying now indirectly to the workers. It's only considered money that's going to the workers and to pay. So this way the farmer can keep working to a certain degree until a certain point when it comes to the fruit. Vegetables, obviously, there's not much you can do. Once they're gone, they're gone. You can't plant anymore. So there's this concept of being able to have a connection to Otzar Beit Din, where you receive a booklet of coupons and it gives you the right to get X amount of fruit or vegetables based on those coupons at a certain time. Again, go online, read about it. I'll tell you for two reasons. I'm not going to get into it. It's a little bit more complicated than I want to discuss. And number two, I'm not well versed enough to explain it. And I will try my best to never teach something or explain something that I don't fully understand. And I'm not fully versed in it yet. It will be as we get closer to it. And then again, if you have questions, I'll be more than happy to answer at that point. How are we doing on time? Good. Okay. I will talk about Svichim. I don't know if I'll get to Biur. Okay. Svichim. On Shabbat, if I want to walk around with this pen, am I allowed to do that? Okay. You all are saying no, and that's correct. Now I'll change the question. On Shabbat, as far as the Torah is concerned, am I allowed to walk around with this pen? Go like this. Yes. As far as the Torah is concerned, the only thing I can't do on Shabbat is take the pen and write with it. There's no problem for me to walk around with it in my pocket. None whatsoever. Chachamim said, look, we're going to protect you from yourself. We know that if you happen to have the pen in your pocket, you're likely going to use it. Thus was born the concept of muktzah. I'm going to tell you a very brief story where I put this into action. I had my middle of my second year here, I was working with indirectly with Bnei Akiva. I was a rakaz, or how do you say rakaz in English? Coordinator of a certain program of kids that were coming from Australia and from South Africa, two different programs. And I had this group of boys from Australia that were staying here by the Yeshiva Tichonit or Birkat Moshe in the dorms. And I thought I was hooked on my phone. I mean, it was surgically implanted to their hands. And I was trying to teach a class, and it was not we teaching. The classroom didn't work. I was teaching us. So I brought them down to the park here. Where am I? Okay, to the park up the hill here. And I said, I'm going to make you guys a deal. It was 4 guys, that's it. If I can teach the next 45 minutes, the topic I want, without you touching your phones, I promise you I'll buy you pizza. What did all of them do? They took their phones, and they took them and put on a different bench. I said, I just taught you the 45-minute lesson. I said, we're going to teach you about muktzah. Because what was the whole point of you moving your phones? So we want to come to touch it and use it. I said, exactly. That's what muktzah is about. It's protecting you from yourself. By the way, they got pizza, obviously. What does this have to do with this? As far as the Torah is concerned, if I plant vegetables, if vegetables grow spontaneously during the Shemitah year, you can eat them. However, Chachamim were very smart, which is why they were called Chachamim. And they said, look, yes, we know that most of our fellow Jews are very upstanding, righteous individuals. And if they grow spontaneously, they'll eat them, and they're not going to plant. But we also know there are plenty of people who are going to say, no one's looking. And they're going to plant vegetables and say, oh, look what happened. I don't know how that happened. Those vegetables weren't there last week. And therefore the Chachamim said, because of this unscrupulous possibility, anything that grows spontaneously during the year, for sure if it was planted, it's asur. But if it even grew spontaneously, vegetables started to grow. Some seeds blew from a tomato plant and all of a sudden found their way to your garden. They start growing in your garden. You cannot have them. That's called svichim. It's also called, I think in English, aftergrowth. You can't pick them. You can't do anything with them. They just stay. They stay where they are. According to Rav Kook, if they fall by themselves to the ground, then you cannot eat them. You can't pick them, can't eat them, can't do anything with them. They're asur to eat. Correct. No different. It's not the same isur as orla, the first 3 years of the fruit tree, but it's asur. Okay. By the way, speaking of not, for those of you who are not that many years in Israel or have only maybe recently planted fruit trees, again, make sure you know certain things when you put those trees in. How long were they sitting in the dirt before they found their way to your garden? When is because the first 3 years you can't take any benefit from the fruit there. You can make birkat ha'ilanot. That you can do, but you can't eat the fruit. You can't sell the fruit. They have to be tossed, and when they're little. The fourth year is called Neta Revai. It has Kedusha. You don't take Trumot and Masrot. You have to be Podeh. You have to redeem it on a coin or through the Beit Din. If you have Otzar Beit Din, if you have Neta Revai in a Shemitah year, you do still have to redeem it. So you say the bracha, Al Pidyon Neta Revai, but you don't do Trumot and Masrot. And then after the fourth year, you can, again, in a normal year, you take Trumot and Masrot. So again, I use this opportunity when we talk about Shemitah to talk just a little bit more about Mitzvot HaTluyot Ba'aretz. And then one of the things I started to say at the end of the last class, and I cut myself off, was that we have an unbelievable opportunity. Had the opportunity to do something that Jews, no matter how religious and how fervent they are, how much they daven to Hashem, and how many hours a day they're learning Torah and doing Chesed, that they can't do in Chutz La'aretz. Only we can do here. So we should really make sure we take advantage of that, whether it's during Shemitah or it's non-Shemitah year, and it's Trumot and Masrot. If you go to the United States, for example, and you're going to go traveling, the easiest thing to do is get fruits and vegetables, right? And it's the easiest thing, make a salad. Here it's one of the more complicated things when you're in Israel. According to Rav Kook, the Isur Sfichim does not apply to fruits and vegetables. Fruits do not have Sfichim. I'm sorry. Only vegetables, because you're not planting any fruit trees that grow within the year. Sfichim does not apply on Heter Mechira land. However, unless you know that for a fact that those Sfichim are from Heter Mechira land, treat them as if they are no good. Can't use them. So whereas in theory, it may be okay, never allow yourself to eat Sfichim. Now, how are you supposed to know? How are you supposed to know? So on these charts that I will eventually send once they're published, I have the old ones from the last time, but I want to make sure I get the update ones. It'll tell you after what point you can consider things Sfichim, because X is no longer available. So if you have X, it means that someone either grew it, which is a big, big no-no, or it just grew spontaneously and you can't have it because of Sfichim. Produce that grows indoors, there's no issue of Sfichim. So if you grow tomatoes or cucumbers inside, I don't know if they will grow, but if you do, then and then they regrow because you can grow them anyways. There's no issue of Sfichim. Unscented flowers, again, we said there's no Kedushat Shvi'it, so there's no Sfichim whatsoever. Scented flowers, which more than likely do have Kedushat Shvi'it, that's where it seems most poskim go. The halacha is unclear when it comes to Sfichim. And therefore, that's why I say, if possible, unless you have a place that has a tu'udah, and there are places that will have tu'udot that say this is Kedushat Shvi'it, this grows by such and such a time, it's best if you stay now. I'm sorry if someone here makes their parnasah from flowers. If you do, I'm not joking. If you do, it's best to really check with your local Orthodox rabbi about exactly how to handle this situation. Yes, please.
Across the street from us, there's like tons of rosemary growing within a box. And I just go over and pick them. First of all, is that okay? So that they don't belong to anyone.
Okay, so let me repeat the question first. The question is, there's tons of, in this whole area, there's a lot of rosemary that just grows wild.
Exactly.
It doesn't belong to anybody. Can you just pick it and use it? So the answer basically is yes, and you don't need to take Trumot Masot because it's hefker. It's really not owned by anybody. Before you ask the next part, when it comes to the olive trees in the community, in the city, and I asked this to Rav Aviner years and years ago. First of all, you are allowed, you can't take like all the olives off of one tree, but you can take many olives off if you want. Go beat them. He says that the city doesn't care. Question is, are they considered hefker or not? They're really owned by the city, but the city doesn't care if you take the olives. So he said to take Trumot Masot without a bracha. But in this case, like the rosemary that's growing wild or something like that, they're
It's not Sfichim.
well, it depends on the list. You have no. The question is if it's Sfichin for rosemary. So you have to take a look at the list. If rosemary says has Sfichin, then after whatever time it says, then you couldn't just pick them. Correct. Okay, so that would be the answer. So they may not have Sfichin. I don't remember each one off the top of my head. Okay. I'm sorry. Rosemary. Does it say yes? And Sfichin. So then the answer is you can. Well, if there's no Sfichin, there's no Biur, which I'll explain on the video I'll put out that we'll finish this series with. I mentioned that. Can you ask about a house plant? Yes. Right. Correct. Correct. So the question is a house plant. You're growing whatever. It doesn't make it. Yeah, it doesn't make a difference what floor it's on. It does. It has no kedushat shvit. You can do what you want with a regular old house plant. Right. Okay. Not a flower, and it's not fruit. It's not a vegetable, a mineral. What is that? Okay, but the question is house plants that flower, but those are not flowers, right? Right. So I'm talking about making a distinction between flowers and things that flower in their while they're growing. That's different. Okay. Right. So things that grow like that, like hedges and things like that nature, do not have kedushat shvit either. That's correct. So if it's in the garden, I would still, yes, you can, but I would stay away from doing anything that people who don't know could potentially see you doing something. Say, oh, she's working her garden. Okay. You cannot transplant for sure, not fruits or vegetable cuttings. And let's say, for example, you have a cutting of a fruit tree or a whatever plant. I mean, a vegetable. You can't say, okay, I'm going to take it and pop it here. That for sure, 100% cannot do that. Correct. It was mentioned or asked before of covering, let's say, for example, pomegranate trees in particular, these large things of netting. It can be done. You're protecting. You're not promoting. It doesn't promote growth. It protects. That is permitted to do. So let me do the following. Oh, I did mention, I want to mention again because not everyone was here for this first year. You may not, cannot, it is asur to take kedushat shvi'it fruits or vegetables out of Israel. You cannot take it to the United States, to Greece, to Crete, no matter where you want to go. Once you leave Israel, you can take it anywhere in Israel. Even though we said it doesn't have the same level of kedusha for Shemitah and all, but you can take it anywhere in Israel you want. You cannot take it out of Israel. So tachlis, where does that apply? Well, you're going to go to your family. You're going to bring a bottle of kedushat shvit wine, or you're going to make some sandwiches for the whole trip, right? I'm going to put on this lettuce and tomato, and the tomatoes are kedushat shvit. So if a couple pieces or something, it seems like that's okay. But you start making multiple sandwiches for the whole time, and maybe have some leftovers when you get to your destination, that you can't do. Kedushat shvit food is meant to be consumed in the land of Israel. I'm going to mention one last topic, but I'm not going to get into it tonight. I'm going to make a short video about it. It's about a 10-minute discussion anyways, and with some questions and answers. I will post that as well. The topic is what's called bi'ur. I'm not going to get into it tonight. If you already know what it is, that's great. It doesn't apply. The earliest it's going to apply is middle of next year. So that's why I'm going to make the video probably still this week or next week, so I have the whole package done. I want to close with two things. Number one, I want to encourage people. Now, some of you are going to know the reference, and I'll explain it. To not let me or anybody else have the Maytag repairman syndrome. There was a commercial on TV in the United States for Maytag repairman. He would be sitting all day long waiting for someone to call because the Maytags were so reliable that no one needed to call to have them repaired. When my phone doesn't ring, and I know that there are questions out there, I had this many times where certain times of the year where I expected, not so much here in the old country, it's like, okay, I expect to get a lot more questions than I'm getting. Something's wrong because sometimes people don't know there are questions. Sometimes I'll get phone calls about the topic of repeat of interest. And people don't even know sometimes that there's certain situations they're getting themselves into a situation where it's halachically bad. People don't know that a certain B'sari Chalavi issue may have come up and they didn't think about it, or Davar Charif, or Shabbat. When you don't know that there's a question to be asked, you're not going to ask, which is why I'm encouraging you to don't rely just on these two shiurim or videos you might see online. Go online. There's going to be a lot of resources, even before you hear from me on the WhatsApp group. Please learn, get into it, ask questions. Feel free, and I mean it not as a joke. Feel free to ask me as much as you want. Message me. Better off always messaging than calling unless it's really urgent, because I may not answer right away, but I will get back to you, Bezrat Hashem, right away. There's a piece of paper on a clipboard going around that the purpose of that is, okay. You can send it on if everyone didn't sign. What that is going to be, it's going to be a WhatsApp group. If you just pass it back there, please. It's going to be a WhatsApp group where I will post all kinds of information, especially before Shemitah, and then hopefully during Shemitah. It will not allow for questions to be asked on there. You'll just ask me, please, directly. Or again, Rav Aviner, there's so many people you can ask, really. And so please, don't ever hesitate to ask. I know it sounds ridiculous. You've heard this from millions of teachers over the years. There's no such thing as a dumb question, right? There really isn't. Please, feel free to ask. And I want to also end with thanking, again, the Maltz family, as always. You should mark down July 17th, 2028. We're going to reconvene. I'm going to leave my notes here. But Bezrat Hashem, I hope this year we'll do a winter series again. If all goes well, I hope, Corona willing. And I really thank you all very much. This is, I really appreciate your having come out. We're going to daven Mariv. And by tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem, both of the shiurim will be available on YouTube. I will post on Facebook, and anyone who doesn't have Facebook, just message me. I'll send you the links to the videos. And Shalom Yisrael. Have a great evening, and we're going to daven Mariv right now. Okay, thank you.